Hey Mustangs, in this video we're going to take an up-close look at the cell membrane and see what cell membrane actually looks like. Now up till now, usually when we draw like our two-dimensional cell here, we point to the outside line and say, okay, that's our cell membrane. But what does a cell membrane actually look like? It's not just a line that goes around the outside of the cell. So we're going to take a close look and see what it actually looks like. Okay. So first thing I want you to think of, go back to our macromolecule units here. And we have 4 macromolecules. We had carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids. Now I want you to think which one of those is most of the cell membrane made of. Okay, so think about that for a moment. Now you should have come up with lipids. Okay, so most of the cell membrane is going to be made out of lipids. So I'm going to draw my lipids. So remember, we had the circle, which represents the glycerol, and then we had the tails that represent the fatty acid chains. Okay, so I'm going to start drawing my cell membrane here with my lipids. Now there's also 2 other macromolecules that make up the cell membrane. The first that we're going to take a look at here, these macromolecules, if you remember, had the most functions, and one of them was transport across the cell membrane. So we're going to draw in proteins. Okay, so here's a protein here. And draw more lipids. And draw another protein. And some more lipids. Now, at this point, my cell membrane is incomplete. Okay, and the reason for that is while I have my lipids here and I have my proteins, the cell membrane is actually 2 layers of lipids. So down here, I'm going to draw my second layer of lipids. So when we look at our cell membrane, it's actually 2 layers of lipids, 1 layer with the glycerol facing the outside and 1 layer with glycerol facing the inside, and the fatty acid chains are in between. So we're going to say this is the outside of the cell. So that would be like right here. And we're going to say this is the inside of the cell. So that would be in here. Okay. So since the cell membrane is made up of 2 layers of lipids, we actually call this a lipid bilayer. If you think about what bi means, it means 2. So we have a lipid bilayer going on here. Now I'm going to go ahead and identify my lipids. So the circles with the tails are lipids. So I'm going to identify 1 lipid there. You go down here and say that's a lipid. Okay, so we have our lipid bilayers here. Next we have our proteins. Okay, now our proteins basically act like little transportation tunnels. Okay, so through the protein here, there's actually channels that molecules can go through. Okay, now your cell needs to get stuff in and your cell needs to get stuff out. Now in order to get in and out of the cell, everything must pass through the cell membrane. So some molecules can actually go through the lipids. Other molecules have to pass through a protein in order to get in and out of the cell. Okay, so in this case, if something was going into the cell and it couldn't pass through the lipids, either because it had the wrong charge or it was too large, then it could go through a protein. Now, for each molecule, there's different proteins that will let it through. So this protein here would let a different molecule through than, let's say, this protein here. So if this one has a channel going through it as well, this would let a different molecule through. So your proteins, their primary job in the cell membrane is going to be transportation. So they're little transportation tunnels into and out of the cell. So I'm going to label this protein. Okay. Now the last macromolecule to make up the cell membrane is carbohydrates. Okay. Now we have these carbohydrates that come off of the cell. I'll label this carbohydrates. Okay. Now carbohydrates, along with proteins, are involved with cell communication. If you remember, we're made up of trillions of cells, and each of those cells has to be able to communicate in order to work together. We call them protein receptors, carbohydrates here. They are involved in cell communication. Okay, so if we take a look at our cell membrane, we have lipids, 2 layers of lipids that make up the cell membrane. We have proteins that act like transportation tunnels, and we have carbohydrates that are involved in communication. All right, that's it for the cell membrane.